I'm great, Mike. How you
Hi,
doing?
Barb. How are you? I'm doing great. It's great to see you again. I hope you're doing
Yeah,
well,
I was really
and
looking
it's great to
forward
have
to
you on the
this.
podcast.
I've had a couple conversations with you prior, and I always love our conversations. It's inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, and that tends the way that the podcast tends to go is it tends to we tend to go down rabbit holes here, but that's just my style. And, I'd rather have a deep conversation about something than a superficial one. So let's get into it. So if I could start by asking, like, what inspired you to get into the
Well,
coaching profession?
this could be a 3 hour long story, but I'm gonna condense it. When I was growing up, we had my grandparents lived on a farm, and my parents have both families are very large, so we would go out there to the farm and play everything. I mean, we would play backyard volleyball, pool volleyball,
Mhm.
basketball up in the hayloft, shuffleboard, chess. We had beanbag throw back then, now they call it cornhole. We had all the horseshoes, everything, and it was always a competition. And I just loved playing. The competition is what I loved about playing. And so, going through junior high and high school, I got into sports and I loved it. I loved everything that you get out of sports. And so I loved it so much. I wanted to continue it. And I'm old, Mike. So there was no pro for women back then or anything. So I decided that that's when I was going to get into coaching and jumped right in and had a great college career. Tara Vanderveer was my coach, and she
Oh,
one of the
wow.
best. I mean,
No kidding.
I to this day, she has not changed in her, the way she treats her players and the camaraderie and the teamwork. You can see her teams play. That's what I look at that and I go, yeah, that's home. And so much from that experience led me to, yeah, I want to give back like that. I want to do that. And so I went into coaching.
Wow, I did not know that. So
Correct. Correct.
she's
Yeah.
still at Stanford, correct? Yeah, one of the great women's college basketball coaches of all time,
Yeah,
coached you
yeah,
at
Ohio
and you went to
State.
Ohio State,
Yes.
correct?
Hey, she's the winningest coach right now in women's basketball. So she's and has given back. Talk about giving back, Mike.
Wow.
She's done so much for so many people, including myself.
Okay, so I didn't expect to go there because I didn't know that. But tell me about her. Tell me about what it is about her, or what are some of the attributes, excuse me, that she has that make her a
Tara's
great
just
coach.
she's real, first of all. I mean, she's gonna tell you like it is, and
Mhm.
she's not gonna sugarcoat it, but she has this way with her analogies. And so she would say things like, why do you settle on being a VW when you can be a Porsche? Those kinds of analogies. And it just it always hit home. Why are you shooting for the B when you can shoot for the A? And just constantly motivational talk from her. And then,
Mhm.
she was all about team. If we're not going to do it together, we're not doing it all type thing. And, whoever was up for the challenge.
Mhm.
I mean, there was a quick story. We're in a timeout in the locker room, and we're playing Northwestern at the time, and this player is killing us. And she comes in the locker room and she says, "Who's going to guard this person?" And I just said, I'll do it. I'll do it. She was 6 foot and I was five. I'm 5'3", 5'4". I wanted 5'5" on the roster because it made me look taller, but I was the shortest player in the Big Ten for 1 year, I think, Mike. Um, but anyways, I said, I'll do it. And so she's
Wow.
like, then you do it. And there was a size difference and everything, but she's like, if you want to do it, you do it.
Mhm.
And the funny story is the the kid had 16 points at halftime and ended the game with 15. So I'm the only person in the history of college women's basketball that took away a point on the stat sheet. No, it was obviously an error. She didn't score, right?
Right, but she
And
didn't
she
score
even,
the second
she took a
half.
point away, which was a mistake. But
Awesome.
Tara was at the end going, "Now that's how you guard somebody. Take points away."
But right. Well, but I think there's a lesson in there, and this is something that I talk about with respect to coaching, and I'm sure you have a more nuanced view of it than I do. But like to me, the word that comes to mind when you tell that story is trust, right? Like she trusted you to go out there because you wanted it, right? And I think a lot of coaches would look at that situation and say, like, no, I can't put this person on her because she's 8 inches shorter, and we got to find someone who matches up physically when she said, "Hey, you know what? I don't care that you're shorter. If you want it, you're probably going to go do a good job." And I think a lot of coaches don't trust their players in that way for whatever reason. And I think that that's something that's
No
lacking in the
question,
coaching
no
profession in
question.
general.
She was, when I was a walk-on at Ohio State and eventually earned a scholarship. So
Mhm.
she, I walked into that office and she said, "Look, there's no guarantees that you're going to make this team." And she was very demanding when we were in practice and
Mm.
on the court, but she was, if you're willing to do it, then you've got a chance. And when she said there's no guarantees, but you can try to walk on, to me it was like she's giving me a roster spot. And what am I going to do with it now?
Mhm.
I can toss it away, or I
Sure.
can, work my tail off and make sure that I get to keep it. And she held up to her word, and I busted my butt, and great things happened, and so many lessons happened. But yeah, trust, you know, demanding but motivational. She's always inspiring, and she's, if you look at any of those videos now when they win, it's like they have fun with her.
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's also underrated. I'm curious though, like as a walk on, were there any instances or any times where you thought about not continuing on, quitting the team
It's
because of
interesting
the way it
because,
was going?
walk-ons, you get no money. You're treated a little bit differently, but when I was with that team in that group, you never felt it. You never felt anything different. And
Mm.
there was never it never crossed my mind that I was gonna transfer. And back in those days, that wasn't even very common. It did happen a little bit, but it wasn't
Mm.
very common, not nearly as common as it is today. If you
Mhm.
didn't play, like I was going there to try out. If I didn't play, I was gonna stay at Ohio State because that's where I was going. And, I'd have to do something,
Okay.
try out the next year or play intramurals or something else, but I was going to that school.
Mhm. Did you have offers to other
I
schools
had
that you turned
one
down
other
for
offer, and then a lot
scholarships?
of people wanted me to just come and, walk on basically. So it was more of that. And,
Mhm.
I said, "Well, I've got a lot of places to walk on. I'm gonna go to the one I want," and, turn down one
Yeah,
offer to go do that.
right. And there's a great lesson in that we were talking before we started recording, but that idea of finding the school that fits you, and it sounds like you went to the school that fit what you wanted as a person, and you happen to make basketball a part of that versus going to a school strictly to play basketball and not having the other pieces of your life fit, whether it's, cultural,
Yeah, and
social,
I'm sure
academic,
that
etc.
you see this as well in your work, but, as a coach,
Mhm.
I have had 30 years of experience seeing student athletes thrive in college and just seeing some of them just survive it. And those 2 experiences are so different,
Mhm.
hugely different, even to the extent where
Yeah.
they go into the, beyond college. Either you're set up and you're confident and you're ready versus you're still surviving and you're either hurt, in a like mentally hurt or
Yeah.
whatever, that it affects the rest of your future and
Mhm.
it takes some time to, maybe come back. But if any student athlete or
Mhm.
any parent saw that either their student athlete or, the student athlete themselves, if they could look ahead and find, be able to see in the crystal ball where the thriving experiences versus the surviving one, they would choose the thriving experience, even if it was in another country, even if it was in another continent. That's how different those experiences
Mhm.
are.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said you were a coach for 30 years. Um, what are some of the things that you did as a coach to help your athletes thrive,
I tried to get
right?
them
Beyond the
before they
basketball
got
court.
there and really try to be honest about what it is that you're getting yourself into, and had those same conversations with parents, and just tried to be as honest.
Mhm.
My assistants would sometimes say, "You're too honest about what it's going to be like." But because of my own experience, I didn't wanna lie to players or sugarcoat things or not be honest with them, because I knew them not being happy is gonna
Mhm.
affect all of us. And I think sometimes coaches are willing to put up with that just to get the best talent in. And so sometimes it works and sometimes it's a big
Mhm.
struggle and sometimes people are now jumping around, jumping out. But, I wanted them to know what they're getting into. And then we always did team building and, leadership type things, and tried to get players to maybe look beyond just the sport they play to something bigger. Because you have to find a passion
Yeah.
too in college. If you're just going for the sport and you get injured or something happens and the sport's not working, you will flounder because you have not put the whole package together.
Absolutely. So it's funny. I had somebody on the podcast a number of episodes ago, and he was a football player in college. And the only reason he was in college, the only reason he went there is to play football to make it to the NFL. And long story short, he had a very serious injury, had to retire, I think, as a junior, and went through a very, very serious period of depression because he didn't really have anything else. And he now admits that, probably 10 years later, he said, it wasn't until I figured out what my passion was outside of football that my life started to get better. And I think if you keep that in perspective from day one, right, you're in college exploring things that are also important to you side by side, which to your point, right, if you have, and I talk to athletes about this all the time, right, if you're feeling good about yourself, then you're going to perform better too. Right. If you're not happy in other areas of your life or you're anxious or you're stressed out or whatever, it's going to be really hard to be at your best when you show up at the court or the field or whatever it is you do, because there's all this other stuff that's occupying you and you can't be your best, right? So you want to put yourself into this bigger frame of mind of like, hey, if I'm happy in my
Yeah,
life, I'm probably going
there's
to play
no
better.
question there. And you hit it on the head with, there's so many things in college that are different than they were in high school. So you're figuring out even
Mm,
your own identity and who you are and who you
yeah.
wanna be, and, it
Yep.
might be the first serious boyfriend or girlfriend, or you get the first C in your life and you are an A
Hmm.
student, or, this whole thing about sitting and not being able to play or injury. There's so many things, and,
Sure.
if you're not, you just have to be open-minded and aware that it's not just gonna be you're the star
Hmm.
athlete in high school and the town knows you in the front page and all those things. When you suddenly that gets cut off,
Hmm.
well, who are you and who do you wanna be? And bring that into college.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's, the phrase that comes up a lot on this podcast when I'm talking to different people is sort of big fish in a small pond, right? In high school, you're catered to as an athlete, you're getting a lot of especially now there's recognition all over the place. I mean, it's just amazing to me how much publicity comes through social media about high school kids who are playing sports. And I think about it 30 years ago when I was in high school, it's like, we didn't have this. If you got your name in the newspaper, it was a big deal. Now it's all over the place. But like you're coming into this new environment where you're just one of many. And it's like, okay, like, am I going to be able to look at this as a growth experience and it's 3 or 4 or 5 years versus like, if I don't come in and play right away, what's wrong with me? Or I shouldn't be here. I need to go somewhere else because that's just not realistic, when you start a new place and
Yeah,
whatever,
I
whatever,
agree.
whatever it is you're doing.
And I think that's with starting it so young, with youth sports, if you're not working on it, if you're not opening the doors and the eyes at that age,
Mm,
then these young kids grow up knowing that I'm this athlete and that's who I am. And I've seen, I'm sure you've
mhm.
seen this in your work too, but just mental breakdowns in college because sudden the
Yep,
athlete is
absolutely.
struggling.
Yeah, I do. I do see that, and I get a lot of um overwhelmed athletes. Probably, I don't know, maybe it's revisionist history. I think I probably was overwhelmed at points too in my athletic career when I was younger because it was so important to me. And a lot of times I position it that way with kids. Is they listen, this is a really important part of your life. So much so that it's sort of overtaking you. Well, what can we do to reduce the burden? And the same for parents who don't know how to deal with it, right? Like that's the other challenge as a parent. Like sometimes they're at their wits' end. Like, how do I help this person, my child, and I don't know that there's anything else that I could do to do that. So it a lot of times is a very upsetting thing to be involved with at first, but it's also very rewarding to help. And so I guess the question I have for you, because this sort of dovetails with your coaching career, but also what you're doing now in the recruiting space, like what are some of the challenges you see when you start to get to know a family, right? Whether you're a coach coming when you were coaching and you come in the house and you have a conversation, or when you're working with people now, helping them understand the process, like what are some of the challenges you see
I think
with the recruiting process?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is that there's just not a centralized place where these parents and families can go. That's why Find My Team was born,
Mm,
because we want to be that central hub.
mhm.
And we're not a recruiting service. We're so different than a recruiting service. We're an educational resource for the recruiting process.
Yeah.
And that means you can come to us for answers, because there's, you can Google things, you can try to find things, and some people spend hours trying to find answers. And,
Mm,
that's just seems like a waste of time. And you still don't know if it's the right answer. You don't know if it's the honest, genuine, good,
right.
up to date information. So that's one challenge. The other challenge I think is, parents love their kids so much, of course, right? So parents want to make life happy for their child. And so they'll step in front
Yes.
if things get tough. That every time they'll fight the battles, they'll speak the words, they'll, knock people out of the way, they'll go blame the
Hmm.
coach or blame the teacher or whatever when the child falls. And if we could just let the child fall, they would learn how to bounce.
Hmm.
And there's this thing about
Yep.
bouncing, that if we even, like, push our kids over metaphorically once in a while and let them fail, they'll get stronger and they'll be able to bounce back. If we don't do that and we
Hmm.
stay, fight all their battles and do all their work from they I mean, people are filling out applications and everything for their child, talking to coaches, emailing the coaches for recruiting purposes. If they do all that work, then
Yep.
it's not gonna be the child's decision, it's the parents, but they're not gonna bounce back, they're gonna bounce out, which is what they're doing. So we're trying to teach, you know, there's gonna be obstacles in college and in the recruiting process. It's gonna be hard. But there's this thing called bouncing
Yes.
back versus bouncing out. And you want them to bounce. You want them to get
I
back
like
up
it.
and keep going and learning. But you've got to be able to, I always tell the parents, we have these conversations now. You got to get in the back seat. Your child has to drive. You got to get in the back seat.
Yes. Right, and that's a phrase I'll use very often is, parents
Yeah.
having parents take their hands off the wheel, right? Like, when you were saying that, I was sort of smiling to myself because it's so true, and I've had a couple people on the podcast, coaches, baseball coaches particularly, who've said, like, "When we're in the recruiting process, we want that email to come from the kid. We want the kid to look us in the eye. We want the kid to take ownership of the recruiting process because we wanna know that they're in it, right? Like versus having mom or dad pick up the phone or send an email or complain about something. Like that's not what we want because then what happens when they get there and there's nobody there to protect them, to advocate for them, right? And that's a real issue. And we talked about this a little bit, before we started recording as well in terms of like the club sports, whether it's AAU, whatever it is, travel sports environment in our country. There's a lot of bouncing around, right? Trying to find the right team, whether it's somebody who's going to play you or someone's going to tell you what you want to hear. And if we're not happy with what we're getting, we're going to move. Like that's also part of the bouncing back process, right? Like, yeah, you know what? I don't like your coach either, son. And I don't love that you're here, but you're part of this program, right? And like you got to stick it out. And we're all going to have bad coaches and bad bosses and whatever it is in our lives, and we have to learn how to deal with it and speak up for ourselves, which is one of the things that I am huge on working with kids in my coaching practice is to say, you need to learn how to advocate for yourself, and I know it's not easy when you're 15, 16, 18, 20 years old, talking to an adult who holds your athletic future in his or her hands, but you have to learn to have that conversation because they're going to respect you for it. And once you know where you stand for real, then that's going to alleviate a lot of the anxiety that you're having because you're making up stories in your head about why I'm not playing or why this coach doesn't like me when it may be something totally different, that you don't really
Yeah,
understand
there's so
because
many
you haven't
times when
spoken to
kids
them
have
about
transferred without talking to, a staff member and, it
it.
maybe through
Mhm.
parents or through even other players. But, if you don't know that, if you don't know what's going on, if the coach doesn't know what's going on because the player isn't communicating that,
Right,
that, things could get way out of
right.
hand. It's like anything. But, kind of like we were
Yeah.
talking about also before was, if you feel like you aren't in the right
Mhm.
program for a club or not in the right high school or not in the right, college team, then before you just bounce out, all these things should happen. Like you're talking about communication. Try, give it a shot. Why are you really
Yes.
here in college? You're going to learn. You're going to be. There's all these characteristics that you get from playing sports to begin with that are going to come into
Mhm.
play, and you're going to use them for the rest of your life. If you don't get a chance to develop those, you're still going to struggle when you
Mhm.
leave if the first thing you think of is, well, they're either not playing me right or I'm not in the right program, or instead of, just reframe it, just turn the
Mhm.
mirror around and just what can I do to make this situation better? That's a
Mhm.
skill that's learned.
Yes. I I couldn't agree with you more, right? And the way I would ask that same question is typically is what could you do differently, right? And having holding yourself to account and being willing to take constructive feedback and not taking things personal. I mean, these are all life skills, right? And I've had so many athletes, particularly college athletes, like, could you, what would it be like to talk to your coach about this? And they're like, I think I could. So, like, why don't you? Because I think there's this perception, and I'm sure you could speak to this better than I do, but like, if you speak up for yourself, there's a perception that you're complaining, right? You're a complainer and you don't want to rock the boat or you don't, right? But and what I distinguish with them is to say there's a respectful way to do it, right? And maybe you're not comfortable with that. We can work on that. We can talk, we can role play it. We can talk about it. Like, how can you go have this conversation? How could you ask the question in a way that makes it seem like you want to get better and contribute and fit in versus like, hey, why are you doing this to me? Which then it becomes
Right.
a
And coaches
conflict, which
really
it doesn't
want their
need to be.
athletes. They want them to come talk to them. And now you may
Right.
not always get the answer you
Exactly.
want back, but the communication is that's half the
Right.
battle that keeps all the walls down and keeps everybody
Uh-huh.
transparently engaged, and it goes much smoother when student athletes can
Yeah.
find their voice.
Yeah. So I want to go back to find my team. And you're sort of talking about that. That's so it sounds like what you're doing really, and you can correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, but it sounds like you're really advising families, right? You're consulting, advising, mentoring people through the recruiting process versus helping them get a result because that's what I when you were talking before, that's sort of what came to my mind, which is to say we're so results oriented. I want to get an offer to go to a division 1 school versus like, hey, how do I get somebody to help me navigate this process so we can find the best answer, whether it's division 1, 2, 3, NAIA, community college, whatever it is, to think through it critically so we get a good result,
Right.
but
And
not
yeah,
a
so
predetermined one.
we get them, and thanks for asking that question. We try to get them as early as possible, and we help them identify things that are really important to them. And they don't know They don't know these things because nobody's ever asked them, and our feedback has
Mhm.
been so good, even from the parents, that we give them this little assessment, and then we go over it, as I was saying, individually with them, and their parents say things like,
Mhm.
"It's opened it's open communication between me, us, and our daughter, because now we're talking about things that
Mhm.
she is about," and she said, "Nobody's ever asked me these questions
Mhm.
before." So it's just like, it's just opening her mind up about, "Hey, maybe I do want this, or maybe I do
Mhm.
want that, or maybe I do want this style of coaching." And, 2 quick scenarios. I had a student athlete come through our program who it was all D1. That was it. D1, D1, that's all I want, D1. And, we took her through the whole program, and she stayed with us, and, you know,
Mhm.
slowly she started realizing that that's not gonna help me get to where I'm going. And it isn't that. I don't want, 24/7, no time for anything else, and but she only knew Division 1. But as she came through, we were able to talk about the differences in the divisions, and not to
Mhm.
think of it as lesser than. That is just a huge misunderstanding, that it isn't lesser than.
Mm.
She ended up going Division 3. She got offers, turned them down to go Division 3. That is unheard of, right? And she's
Wow.
gotta pay for this now, but this is where she wants to go. This is what her life, and so this
Yeah.
is one transition. On the other side, I had a little, cross country
Mhm.
runner who through COVID had gotten ill and didn't think she was gonna play at all. So she was aiming at, again, wrongly so, the division instead of the place. She was thinking, "I'm not gonna get anything." And we worked hard, and we got creative with her times, and she had to do a lot of work. Both of them did. And she ended up getting a Division 1
Mhm.
scholarship for cross country, and she went there. And it's like, it's the fit of these places. And if you
Yeah.
find it, these kids they're gonna
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah. How much, and this comes up a lot, so I'll ask you, how much influence do you think
I
social
think
media
media in
has over the
general,
process?
social media, media on TV,
Yeah.
all of it has a huge plays a huge role. Yeah. But I also think, like, you and I were talking about youth sports. There's in club sports, there was a club program, well thought of program around in the country, who, has a bit of a
Mhm.
reputation for putting out good kids. And so one of his players chose Division 2 over Division 1. I'm sorry, Division 3 over Division 2, so was gonna get a scholarship, turned it down, went Division 3, and he reamed her.
Mhm.
He said, "You're a disgrace to our club because we have a reputation to uphold." And so all of the kids, he told all the kids not to associate with her anymore. So all of those kids now have this
Oh my
impression that
goodness.
if they don't go to the highest level, then they're gonna be, criticized for it. And it's just this messaging that we're giving, passing on is
Yeah.
really a disservice to these kids finding the right fit.
Yeah. And I listen, as upsetting as that is to me to hear, it doesn't surprise me because these coaches are running these private clubs that are made to generate a profit. And so for them, it's reputational. And it's like if we're not turning out, more scholarship athletes, then it makes us look bad. And we're going to lose business because of it. Right. And they want to punish that choice, which is terrible, right? It should be about the athlete, about the kid, not that. And then you've got the other side of it, which is the parents who, God bless them. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids and they both play sports and it's not the cheapest thing in the world for us to do. And I think there's just this implicit understanding a lot of times with parents. It's like, well, if I'm investing all this time and energy and money into this process, like there should be something on the back end to defray the cost, which would be a scholarship, right? And it's not like they want ill for their children, but like I think it's just a natural human instinct to be like, okay, let's get something out of this. And I think that contributes to the pressure that the student athlete feels to make their parents happy, which then it becomes just like a circle, in terms of, creating anxiety in the system, stress in the system because they're trying to
Yeah,
please all these
I've
different
actually
masters.
talked to some student athletes who can't talk to their parents about what they really want because parents want them to
Mm,
go Division 1, and they have to get a scholarship or they don't get to play sports, and that again is a that's a tough one. I mean,
mm,
there are ways to fund all levels, all divisions of college, and it can work out. And again, I would
yeah.
point all those parents back and the club coaches back to, here's a chance for this human to thrive in college and to really be able to be set up
Mhm.
so that they're able and capable of giving
Yeah.
back when they get out there and, making the world a better place instead of, bouncing around or putting
Mhm.
people down to get up and all these other things that you can learn through this experience as well. And,
Mhm.
what do we want? What do we want to teach them? And I just look at back at my own experience. It's like, you play because you love it when you're young. And as you go through up the ranks of high school and college and maybe even pros, it gets less and less and less about liking and loving the sport and more about just doing it, which is my whole thing about thriving versus surviving.
Mhm. Yeah. And listen, and listen, rightfully so. Like being a college athlete, particularly at the Division 1 level, is like a job, right? When I talk to kids, and I have a few Division 1 athletes that I work with, listen, the schedules are rigorous. You're lifting, and you're going to study hall, and you're traveling during the week, and you're obviously going to practice, and like there's all these obligations, and so like it's a full-time job, and so if you're not enjoying it and you're not playing or you're not participating because you're not as good as somebody else, like that's gonna, I think, lead you to question, like, why am I doing this? And I think that that's a healthy exercise, right? Just because being an athlete's such a big part of your identity, I get it, but at the same time, it's like, does it really make sense for me to continue on here if I don't really enjoy it? And I think that's like taboo, like a lot of kids would never even think that or even have that conversation. And it's scary to think that kids aren't willing to talk to their parents about stuff because they're afraid of what they're going to get back. They just kind of keep it to themselves, or, like, I'm just going to put my head down and power through.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
that's,
there's a
that's
lot of
sad
those
too.
instances where it's their choice is determined by somebody other than themselves, and so it's not theirs. And so there's this you were talking about
Yes.
ownership. There's no ownership. There's
Hmm.
no investing in themselves, and so
Yeah.
it's a 50-50 chance that that's going to work out. Maybe even less than that. I don't know, but
Hmm.
if we could all just remember that it is just sports. It is just sports, and it is so
Hmm.
fun and so good for you in so many ways
Hmm.
that when everything else clouds that vision, it can get really ugly really fast and instead
Yeah.
of what it should and could be.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I agree with you on that. I think it's really important to continue to sort of put that message out there, as much as sometimes I think it gets kind of lost in the mail. But so, how much talk about the work that you do with parents specifically? Like, what are some of the things that you're trying to educate parents on? What are some of the what's the right word? Just the pushback you might get from a parent, or some of the skepticism, or is there any of that, or are parents, open to
Well, I
the
think once they
education
understand it,
process?
once they see what's happening, and once they see their daughter start finding her voice and about her decisions and understanding,
Mm,
hey, I need to ask these people for this and these people for this, but not ask everybody for everything in this process. And it's zeroed out. And what do I really need and want? And who can I go to? And where are my resources? And when she has all that armor, she can do this. She can find a place. Your
mhm,
student athlete can find the right place. And when the parents see that that's working, they're
mhm,
willing to be in the back seat. And I had a couple parents, partway through say, okay, now it's time for me to start, calling people. And I told this father, I said, if you start doing that, it's gonna you're gonna get it all back and you're gonna be doing it again instead of allowing her. to keep doing this. She's doing this, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Just trust me. If you will stay out of the way, she'll finish it." And she did. And he said, "You know, you're right. You're right." And it is just about that. It's sort of like the coach trusting the player. It's the parent trusting the student athlete, the child. They
Yes.
can, and if they truly want to do it, they will. If it's your decision that she or
Ri
he is going to play, and so you let them out there and they don't do it, that's
Mhm.
another sign.
Right. Right. Eh I'm so glad that you said that, right? Because I think at the end of the day, if we ever if we really wanna be great at anything we do but sports, it has to be our choice, right? It has to be we have to be motivated to do it on our own because otherwise it's not sustainable. It's like, with my own children, I'll go back to that because if my son or daughter doesn't want to do something and I force them to do it, they're just they're just going to be going through the motions, right? As much as I want them to continue on because I think that they could be have the potential to be something bigger or better. Yeah, should I push them? I don't know, but I know that if they're not invested in the process of like spending the time and energy to do this, like it's a waste of everybody's time and money and whatever else. And they got to want it. And sometimes you got to get out of the way and let them figure it out as much as it's maybe painful to watch them,
Yeah, that's
kind
the
of
tough
flounder
thing
on their own.
for parents. I know that's tough. And that's where,
Mhm.
you just have to, you have to go a little higher and know, okay, unless the situation is harmful
Mhm.
to her, like, life or his life,
Right.
that's different.
Right.
Then
If
you
she's in
yank her out or
danger,
you come in
exactly.
or whatever. But if it's her learning something, if it's
Yeah.
her struggling a little bit, that I think is very powerful, and she'll get better at, you know, navigating that stuff, because life is going to be somewhat of a struggle sometimes. And
Mhm. Right.
when will they learn it if they don't learn it through sport? I mean, or through growing up, even if the parents are always going to step in front like
Yeah.
that.
Are there common themes or common challenges that you see with young women, high
I
school
think
age
one of the
women who are going
biggest
through the process?
issues is confidence. I think young females, for whatever reason, sports is supposed to be enhancing confidence, but I believe that
Mhm.
because they're not able to drive their own process, because they're not able to make their own decisions, because they won't or can't, or somebody won't let them, somehow it's impacted their confidence. And I think social media has also really impacted not
Mhm.
only girls, boys too, but definitely young female athletes with, the way you're supposed to look and talk and act. And it's gotten bad, I think, social media. And I'm not sure how to fix that or stop that, except to teach kids how to use it and where to stay off it, and
Mhm.
be careful who to like, and all those things that are so important. Uh, you know, I mean, we even do
Mm.
that with them anyways, because if you're past college and you're looking for jobs, whatever you post is not going away, even if you try to make it go away, all out there. But I think those are
Yeah.
some real tough issues for girls.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it doesn't surprise me, and I've heard that in many different contexts in terms of young women struggling with their confidence, and I think there's a lot of reasons why that is, and maybe we're not gonna get into all those reasons here today, but I think it's important, right? So, like, in terms of your role in the recruiting process and helping them, like, what are some of the things that you might suggest or you might bring to their attention to help
Well, what we do
to
with them
increase their
is
confidence?
open up a whole different world of how to think about things, and we, sit down
Okay.
with them just like this, and we, just talk about things. And this assessment, we go over it, and they get to identify what their own
Mhm.
obstacles are, and then we work on those things. So it's a very personal process
Mhm.
for each person, because everybody's process and everybody's journey, everybody's resources, everything is different.
Yes.
So there isn't a one size fits
Yes.
all template for the recruiting process. if you're gonna really get in there. I mean,
Mhm.
people right now think that all you need to do is get on a club team. That's all you have to do, and then sit back and wait. And that's another huge misnomer that if you truly want to find a place, there's so much more. Exposure shouldn't drive the process. The person should drive the process. If you let exposure drive it, you're sitting and
Right,
waiting. And then by the time that you get seen and get recruited, it's rush, 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 rush to try to figure everything else out. And most of it's just shelved anyways. And then you get there as a college freshman, and you don't know why it's not working because you weren't able to give it the time it needed.
right. So are you finding or are you having success getting access or getting introduced to players at a younger age, like starting in the freshman, sophomore type of year? Or is it more people coming to you later on junior, senior year, sort of in a frenzy to try
It
to,
started with
get
people
something worked
more,
out?
later, but now because we're talking about this to get them
Mhm.
earlier is it's just starting, and so we have, like,
Mhm.
real short packages even, like, just come through for, 4 or 5 quick phone
Mhm.
calls, and we'll have you on the right path to doing this work on your own,
Right.
and
Mhm.
some of them have good, helpful coaches, and some of them don't have helpful coaches, and some of them have, parents who've played,
Yeah.
and some of them have parents who have no idea. And so it's just, again, there's just so many, everybody's resources are a little different. And so we empower them to figure out which resources they want to use. And then we teach the resources how to help them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right, exactly, like train the trainer type stuff, right? Like, okay, you're there
yeah,
all the time. Here's what you need to do. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's the way I approach my coaching. Is everybody is different, right? And there's no one size fits all, and a lot of it is personalized. And to your point, even more importantly, is they're telling you what they think they need to get better at, because that goes back to motivation. If they believe that this is something they need to get better at, it's almost like if somebody thinks it's their idea, they're going to stick with it more than if you tell them to do something, right? If they're telling you like this is what I need to get better at, they're probably going to work on what they need to get better at, right? Get better at it versus like me saying to you like this is what you need to do, which is what they get 90% of the time, right? You need to do this or else. And then it's like they tune you out or be like,
yeah.
you know what, you're wrong just because. So it's really important. I've had a couple of other gentlemen that I know here in New Jersey where I live who have a similar type of business to you, and they work mostly with baseball players and males, and they kind of expanding, but it's the same approach. It's this very holistic, like consultative approach of like, hey, what's going to fit for you? What do you need to get to where you want to go? Like being honest with the player and saying like, you want to go to Division 1, but maybe you're not a Division 1 player. Like, here's what you should be looking at, right? Like this very honest approach that's resource driven versus saying like, oh, we're going to get you an offer and get you placed and put it all on the result, and you might lead them down the wrong path just because you're trying to get, you know, an offer,
All
which
right.
is
And I
completely
think,
out of your
that
control.
anybody that, you know, promises to get an offer or even promises roster spots
Mhm.
is a flag, and I think families should think twice about signing up with people who
Mhm.
aren't in it to really help this individual find a fit. And
Mhm.
like I said, there's so many, ways to do that. But my approach I'm a teacher. I've always been a teacher. So it's like if I
Mhm.
just show you how to do a layup by watching it on film, you might be able to replicate it. But if I can teach you how to put this foot in front of this foot, and where to put this knee, and where to put your arms, if I can show you all that,
Right.
you're able to do it without even having seen it. I mean, you can do it. So it's like breaking the recruiting process all the way down to
Right.
here's the first step and here's the second step, and they're so doable, and we make it fun so the kids enjoy it, and they learn, and they're doing it on their
What
own eventually.
what what would you say is one way, or what's a way that you try
We
to
get
make it
on,
fun for
and
them?
I give them a hard time, and so we get on like this, and we meet often and talk about it often and give them
Yeah.
homework, and they come back, and we talk about it and give them fun projects to do and
Mhm.
how to, make it fun to go
Yeah.
talk to this person, and like you said, practice. We practice and just have a good
Yeah.
time with it. And they've got school and they've got other sports, and so we want to be a fun sidebar, not something they
Mhm.
have to show up to.
Excellent. That makes sense to me. So as we wind down, the one question I always ask everybody at the end in some similar form is if there's one piece of advice that you'd have to give to, I'd say a family in your case, right? Like if there's a family listening, a parent or a student athlete or both who are listening about listening to this, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them
I
about
would
the
just
recruiting
say,
process?
keep the main thing. And by that, I mean, just, let it organically become what it's supposed to be with your student athlete instead of trying to force it in, he or she, into a certain sport, or force into a certain team, or force into a certain position or into a certain college, or let it grow organically and just water it, and it will flourish. And by it, I'm talking about their children and families. And the recruiting process is hard, it's challenging, it's hard to navigate, but if you can break it down and learn how to do it, parents becoming advocates for their student athlete and student athletes driving their own process, you'll be amazed at what can happen.
Okay. All right. I'll ask you one more question then, because I think that that's aligned with everything that you've talked about here in the last 45 minutes or so. So for parents, and this is specific to parents, if parents are going to be the advocate and are going to step back and let the student athlete take ownership, what's the one thing that they should work on as a
Keep
parent
their
to
hands
do
off the
that?
wheel. When you want to fight,
Okay.
when you want to fight for your child, ask yourself, is this a time where when I'm just trying to make them happy, or is it a time when they're in trouble? Like, we were talking about this before. Are they in danger, or
Right.
am
Is
I
there real
just,
danger here? Right.
trying to help their happiness? Because if it's answer number two, then you've got to keep your hands off and step back and see again, just there something good is gonna come out of this if it's a struggle or whatever, and you're strengthening that person so that they'll be able to handle life later on.
That's that's a great way to end it. So, Barb, I want to thank you for coming on here. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was great seeing you again, and hopefully we can
I would
keep
love
talking
that,
and
and
maybe do it again
we got to
sometime.
get you on our show too. That'll be the next thing. We'll get you conversations. Yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds
Because Mike,
wonderful.
you've obviously done this for a long time now, and you've got a great business going. But you're, above all that, and you've got a family too. But you're helping so many people, and I know that we can, if all of us work together, we can really not only help these kids find the right place, but help them enjoy
Yes.
it when they get there because they'll come in more prepared.
Hmm. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And it is for me, it's absolutely about helping, you know, helping these young people get to where they want to go. And if you, what I've learned too is that kids spot a phony from a mile away. If you're genuine with them and you come into it with good intentions in yourself, they'll come towards you, you know, because they know you have their best interest at heart. And I think those of us who are sort of fall into that bucket need to just keep chugging away at, what is a very
Well,
challenging
I have found
system,
that parents and
in that
student athletes
respect.
both they're open for guidance. They want guidance. They want help, and
Yeah,
most of them are very coachable. All right. Thank you.
that's great. Well, Barb, thank you again. I appreciate
All
you
right.
coming on
Thanks so
and
much.
I will talk to you soon. Thank you.